Okay, this is one I've been wanting to do for a while, and I pulled up a few items and articles about it. And I was trying today to find something more that I could add to it. If I could put one more spice in that soup and make it just right before I go to hand it out, it would make everybody feel better about it. Ironically, and it seems to be just given in this way, that at this time Robert Sepper puts out a new video showing Celtic origins, and I found that spice that I was missing. It was coriander, and I didn't even think about it. And it's right there in front of you, if you know what I'm saying. This is going to be a multi-parter showing you a Celtic origin and the Irish origins and what people have found out now in connections. And believe me, we're going to go all over the place with this one a little bit, but we're going to make connections that I've alluded to quite a few times. But whenever we do it in the method that's shown here, it kind of really lets you make that spider web connection that we talked about before. Because one of the key people we're going to talk about at a certain time in a certain area in my mental map of this web of how everything came to be through time, 3D, like I talk about in a lot of my videos that I have as a visualization for myself. This point that we're going to talk about are a few of them that are quite connected. After a short amount of time, required a larger nail to attach all of these attachments from all of these other places far and wide that are connecting back to one. Again, it's going to be a multi-parter, and I'm not sure if it's going to nip off the end like it does on me half the time. And so the next part is always going to be in your top left-hand corner, and I'm going to shoot for it being 3 episodes at this point, but there's no good in trying to lie to you, and y'all have seen a lot of my series of videos. So let me get into this, for I'm already skipping a minute and 40 seconds of the original video that's here in front of me showing you these ladies dancing. Now these are Celtic ladies at a festival that's honoring it with druids and all that type of thing that you would think of. They're wearing a blue switch green Celtic skirt or kilt, if you will. The other fabric that's there of their dress is extremely ruffled. And I'd like you to listen to what Robert says about them and the Celts in one statement as we get into this. But in doing so, I want you to look at these ladies too and see if you don't see something that looks like Persian dancing, a little bit of belly dancing type of thing going on, and types of dance that you can really make connections to from many places. Then there's another fact that they're all wearing makeup and face makeup, and this would connect to the ancient Picts who had pictures drawn on their bodies like tattoos, and I'm willing to bet a few of these ladies have tattoos too. Let's just get into this after fresh mentioning it here and see if you can see their dance, and then watch what he says about this.
While it's commonly believed that the Celts were a collection of tribes which originated in Central Europe, genetic sequencing has shown that they were actually comprised of several waves of migration into Europe by separate tribes that shared a similar culture, traditions, and religious beliefs.
Surely you can see a belly dancing connection to this. So what if the women are wearing a little bit more clothes here in doing their dances? You can see the face paint and things like that. But if you heard what he said right there, that there was a succession of waves And I've been saying this before it ever came out that there was more than one possible wave. And then everybody proved that there was definitely one well back, and then there was Anglo-Saxon and so on, and they acted like, two. And that was real conspicuous with the attitude, because it seemed like you already knew that, and you know something that you're not saying. I got that distinct feeling whenever I was a kid going through this type of idea, looking into this, and I was like, what? It gets to the point to where a lot of my rabbit holes ran out, and I think I was running down a wrong run. And of course, during that time, I was trying to hook up to magic, mythology, and all of these things. And so I ended up taking a break from it. And then at an odd point right there, something much later, all of a sudden, it was odd. It was just like a rabbit in your middle of your living room comes hopping in and sitting up looking at you, and you're like, the hell are you doing in here? And then your mind snaps about the thing that you were saying about the white rabbit before. And it all clicked. This happens over and over again, and it's one way I mentally inside clearly validate all of these points, because it seemed like I was searching for everything, and all I really needed was a house for this doorknob that I started off with, if you'll follow me. You can see this dance type that I'm talking about here, but there's these kilts, and we're going to go into kilts, and we're going to go into tartan fabrics, and we're going to go all over the damn place. But in doing so, I wish you had a old world map there in front of you that you could throw a dart in real quick and keep it at a certain point. But when we go to other points, I'd almost like to have a little clip and put it in between each one whenever I'm talking about things, and just have a dartboard up there with the old world on it and be like, stuck, now we're here. And then go up there with a piece of yarn and go, there's connections between this place, and there's connections between here. We'll try to show them to you as it goes through here, and it does flip around a little bit, but if you'll realize it, it's always on the same connective and the same people, the same connections. And so it seems like it's going all over the place, but these people were going all over the place.
We don't actually know for certain what the Celts called themselves, as none of the classical texts refer to the people of Britain and Ireland by that designation. The name Celts is a modern term which is used to describe many tribes of people who lived during the Iron Age, rather than one collective empire or nation.
Now that's something that people don't usually think of. You think of Celtic as some almost type of ethnicity. And a lot of times when people talk about, oh, these people are those people, you get an idea of an ethnicity or a blend that those people have. Quite often that might be something that's more modern, including the whole fact of the general phenotype that you're looking at is not actually seen in ancient times. I repeatedly proved that with things like people say about the Holy Land with the way it looks now, and they try to give a depiction of Jesus, and it's like, yeah, but then here's this story that tells you that that demographic didn't even exist at that time, so why are you trying to force this idea on us whenever the only descriptions we actually have of the man shows chestnut hair and everything, and the earliest depictions pretty much all showed him. Oh, and people tried to say Caesar Borgia and all these type of things. It predates that. That'd be just like me saying it's all about Nickelback's singer because 15 years ago that dude used to look like Jesus. Or my wife's first husband, who really looked a lot like Jesus. To the point that I was over at his parents' house one time, and on the mantle, they had 11 kids, by the way, what a nightmare. But on the mantle, were some pictures there, and I go, oh, da da da, and it's Jesus, and they go, that's Joe. And as I started to walk closer to it, I realized, oh, that is just a real picture of him. It's crazy. It looked like Jesus. If he would have just had his hand up doing a hand gesture or something, it'd been undeniable. I'm going to wander off all down these lanes here and get lost and not know my way back to the campfire if I don't get going here. But tartan fabrics, remember that? Belly dancing, and what's that got to do with Celtic ladies? What the hell is going on here? We'll try to put it all together for you. But surely you can see this belly dancing mixed into this idea. And believe it or not, all these type of dances, and Robert's even done a video about it, where about half of the video he shows all these guys in the ancient Middle East doing these dances. But what he should have shown too is these people doing it too, because there's the whirling dervish, there's the footwork that they do, there's the Persian thing. Here we are walking or dancing like an Egyptian, and there, if I'd have shown you your first minute and a half, there's actually connections that look like parts of ballet are in this. And it's not in it because the girl that's doing the choreography took a ballet class when she was a kid. It's because that's an ancient Celtic dance, and that we get it from the other way. So Celts were really never named that, and at the point that they did start to have contact with them, and the Romans started going out that way instead of finagling and getting with the Greeks effectively. And of course we all know what they did in the Holy Lands and running down through there, but most people also know about the fact that, well, Vespasian and Titus and so on, they were having these campaigns over here. But quite a few flattering things, and it's hard to believe in a world full of propaganda back then that they had enough flattering things to say about them. Sure, there were snide remarks and everything, and if they weren't going to learn Greek or Roman to speak to them, or Italic, they'd call them barbarians and so on. But they also said they came in unarmed and just cut people's head off and whooped our ass. And it really was not in favor to say things like that all the way through from way back. Like when Ramses went all the way up to Anatolia and got his ass kicked, and then he came back and showing you all this courage thing, and then they ended up coming to a consensus here, I guess, you know, the treaty type of thing that they came up with. But in doing so, when you look whole off into it, it's like, well, the Egyptians have a much nicer, better looking form of this, and there was kind of a standoff situation whenever it actually comes out that he was lucky to come out of there alive. But Keltoi was one of the first names that are put on them, and it actually, you know, people have said it makes connections to the kilts that people are wearing and so on like that. But a lot of people were wearing kilts at this one time. And what's crazy is a lot of people don't make connections that the Egyptians, the Greeks, the Romans, they're wearing kilt type of things during this time. Where do pants actually come from? Well, believe it or not, it comes from the people that started off with those kilts. Now, the Greeks took it to another step there and made togas out of it, but let's get on with this thing before we just get stuck on too many ideas here. So the first people that come to the Celtic islands, and what you would think of as a Celt, is legally not actually a Celt. It's actually the Irish. And whenever you look at a spread like this, that's a little closed in, but that word there you see Yan of is Aryan, or what we call Proto-Indo-European nowadays. And the first splits off of this, and the one that runs to the bottom is actually Anatolian languages. The one that runs up as the first notch up and back down is Tocharian. Then the next comes up and bifurcates and shows you that one connection of them goes to the Hellenic languages, Armenian and Albanian. And of course this is Greek and so on like that, but the other split on that exact same moment has a split that bifurcates again, by the way, and it's hooked up to Indo-Aryan languages and the Iranian languages, Balto-Slavic languages, Germanic languages on the top grid here, Italic, and then Celtic, which we're talking about. We'll look at another spread here coming up later, and it'll show you that, yeah, English and everything comes from that. In fact, everything from Sanskrit all the way to ancient Irish are totally connected up with linguistics that people have noticed hundreds of years ago. And it used to be talked about a lot. In fact, a lot of this information shown here used to be talked about a lot. But after World War II, all of a sudden this gets drastically taken away and acted like it never exists. There's so much ambiguity now in archaeology about any of these types of things. And it looks like we're starting to have a little bit of leeway here, looking back into it and pretending none of that existed. And now we're just going to talk about Indo or Pi people. And they were way up there and we don't know what, blah, 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 blah. And if you start making all these connections that I do in my videos, they don't like it. It's crazy. Right after we had that Cleopatra debacle and stuff, there are a few guys that really are mild-mannered Clark Kent and usually get a little bit ambiguous. And I know of other connections that he could put in right there, but he stops or he gets ambiguous about it. And I'm thinking, yeah, you know about this stuff and everything. And then all of a sudden when that Cleopatra thing comes out, a couple of them came out swinging. They're like, oh, well, if you want to pull some bullshit, check it out. Ethiopians never meant people down in the south, and it wasn't even black people. It was Caucasians that lived in the far east and the far west of the world where the sun rises and sets, and that's how they got their sunburnt faces, because it really meant sunburnt faces. It wasn't talking about somebody who had a permanent melanistic form. Oh, and there was a few others. Got a couple saved up there in the top row too, but perhaps just waiting to see what we can do out of this Cleopatra debacle and lies that have been shown in that, because a lot of people didn't know about that until it happened. But here's a connection with linguistics all the way to Celtic that you can see there. And Celtic is closely related to Italic, Germanic, Balto-Slavic, Indo-Iranian. So this is kind of leaving it over there, but you did see that second band that was showing you all these people in the ancient Near East and Anatolia and so on. All these linguistics totally connect. There were points there that you could take these people and they would have been able to understand each other. Things have changed a lot. I guess an easy example for most people listening to me is we never say ye old tavern anymore or anything like that. That's just Old English. And then there's proto form before that. But what were any of the people speaking before that? Well, it starts to make connections, and it comes all back to this explosion point that all started from these one people. The annals written in the 1630s are an Irish language history of Ireland from the biblical flood all the way up until 1616. What? Yeah, so you look at things like the Ora Linder book, and a few of these, and even the Scottish Declaration of Independence, and they show you that and say that they came from the Holy Lands and did this, that, and the other, and you go, surely you're just trying to wrap yourself into that. I mean, red-headed people, Scots are full of in Ireland. I mean, what are you talking about? Well, I'm going to show you here in a minute that that was the demographic going on at the time. They were definitely there, and especially in nobility of all of these cases. In fact, a lot of these little fairy tales, like what we're looking at here, and ideals that go on, Odin and all those things actually come from real people that existed at one time, turned into ancestor veneration, and then woven into a myth. Try to see if I can do that if I can. We'll look at the Tuatha De Danann. And this lady that looks like an angel on the left of him here, and if I told you that was a representation of Adam and Eve. or that people had rebirth ideas like you can take a caterpillar or a worm, which is another name for a dragon, and once they get reborn or rebirthed, they end up having wings on them. Well, the cherubim are right here behind him and stuff, but if you'll look around, this is the Tuatha Danann idea, or another look upon this. Just in this effigy, they're not showing them riding in on horses. They're wearing head shields that look like unicorns. These are fairy tale creatures. It's where all of that comes from too. There's so many connections, it's unreal. And here's another depiction of the Tuatha Danann, with the ones on the left, unicorns and so on like this, showing you ancient depiction. And this is part of the founding of what we know of as the UK, or Britain, if you will, the islands that are over here. But it was really a confederation of different groups. We keep referring to the words tribes and so on. Coming up, there's going to be connection to things about the lyre and the harp that we're looking at on this. And Odin is a young man, Odin is an old man, and so on, and makes connections to biblical tales, all kinds of things. But let's see if I can get into this a little bit more and carry it to the next level here. See, the Danites are referred to by the Greeks and a lot of people around, and they were looking like they have a connection to the ancient Phoenicians or somebody. They were definitely in that ilk, are connected to it in some way. And whenever they left and had a dispersal, which a lot of people think that it happened at the end of the Bronze Age collapse, but others have shown, well, it already happened way before then, of a connection into the British Isles, and Cornwall with its tin is what helped fuel the bronze of the Bronze Age from copper, the Chalcolithic Age. So in Homer's Iliad, they talk about these people and stuff, and how it has connections to Trojans and so on. What? Well, yeah, that's pretty easy to understand. But where are those people now that they were even talking about in these ancient tales and stories? Well, we come to find out a large contingent of them are actually in far Western Europe now, in the islands that we're talking about. One of the videos that I had pulled up and ready to go on this concept was a description which actually says ancient DNA reveals Irish, or not Celts, Irish ancestors came from the biblical lands, scientists say. And whenever I looked that up, it was hooked up, but then I found another one and I go, oh, I already made a video about this a couple of years ago. So I don't want to reiterate or show this idea again. But they're saying that the Irish were around about 1,000 years before the Celt signature even shows up. What we're going to find out shortly is that the Celts were ancient Ibermerasian type people, and they come some out of North Africa and basically out of Spain, and they were coastal somewhat because they were fishermen before moving more north. One can understand in ancient times when the ice shelves were pulled down, more southern was north, but that changed too. So there's this ancient connection to the tribe of Dan, and a lot of people have talked about, you know, the 12 tribes and how this works out, and there are connections to that. In fact, here's one on Irish Central, which is saying, are the Celts one of the 10 lost tribes of Israel? There's a theory that the Celts are descended from one of the lost 10 tribes of Israel, the tribe of Dan. Right? And it's been found by Jewish historians and stuff. So it's not something that goes too far away. But you'll find that they have a connection to it, and because there's a swirl of connection of Celts and Irish, they have another connection. But it connects to the Bible too, with People like David, who used a harp to serenade, and we can find a similar harp to this in ancient Sumeria, whether it has a bull's face on it or not that people are familiar with. Or the kithara, which actually had a little whammy bar on top of it so you could do Eddie Van Halen crap. Most of you are probably unaware that all of these ancient scales are all built on sacred geometry, the octaves and so on, but the scales are all named from people of this time who no longer really exist. Everything changed, but Ionian and Dorian, all of these scales that they have are all named after areas that are around there. It's crazy to think about all the things that are actually kept. But let's talk about another musical instrument here known as the bagpipes. Now, most people realize that that's probably a little bit strict Scottish some way and so on, but believe it or not, the bagpipes go back way, way far away. I did a video about this, must have been 4 years ago now, and it's got connectives that he's going to show in it also. But this, instead of just blowing a pipe, like a flute or something along that line, this has got a bag of wind hooked up to it, and so you keep blowing to fill up that bag, but it's not strict. In other words, the sound coming out isn't directly off your breath, it's off of your pushing by your arm that's around the bag. And so you can keep this constant droning going on with this music. And there are, well, hopefully you notice the kilts on the Celts here, but there are a lot of connections showing you that really it's a military type of thing, and it has to do with it. In fact, the Romans used to have a bugle or a trumpet, like a lot of people did for cavalry or for certain situations, but whenever they had their other people come in, that was shown and done by this. And there are wood carvings that show an animal situation where it's actually a pig's bladder that causes it. But a lot of these depictions that are shown here, in fact, if you find them drift away over time, you'll end up finding them drift to this earliest found depiction in Anatolia, or up the Euphrates from Sumer, of this. There's a picture taking of it, but assholes came in and vandalized all of this and a lot of the other artwork that was connected with it. But you see it here with this balloon idea. But that's not the only place that you find that there. But the question is, I guess, is that Irish? Is it Scotch-Irish? Or does it come from a time and a people that these same people are from well before it? Because as I'm showing you today, there are connections of these ancient people living in the biblical lands right there. There are a lot of people who have connections to the genetics that are directly there, not just there, but in Egypt and all over the place. These ancient dances that you see that are all kept to this day, and these tartan fabrics that are shown here and stuff, are very similar to other dances all over the world. But you think bagpipes are only showing up in some Irish type thing as some little gimmick and stuff, but here they are right in the Holy Land, and they're playing that same song. It's the same song, and it's not that they're doing it because it's a crowd favorite. And so the bagpipes go back quite some time in some ways, and I've shown you how genetics hook up to these, so it's where it comes from, and it dwindled away. But there are cooler other effigies showing them using bagpipes in some way as an air bladder to secretly get in under gates that were hooked up to moats to let water run into the city. And they had a grid in front of the thing, but the guys just went up underwater using these air bladders and snuck in. It's a well-attested story. And in fact, here's an effigy written in stone about it. And these people actually scuba diving at a real early time. The first divers were breath holders for food, basically shellfish harvesting and commerce, pearls, sponges, as long as 4,500 years ago in Mesopotamian Greeks and Chinese, he says. But there's another connection too to the ancient Phoenicians, for they had women that were dive and ended up collecting those special type of snails that they made the purple dye out of. In fact, there was a gimmick that they could easily hold their breath longer than any man that's going to try over here. And it starts to come across twisted into a story that looks like mermaids. But that's in other videos. An Assyrian drawing from 900 BC seems to indicate the first diving set where there's a snorkel and an airbag. Breath hold divers also used in military and salvage operations. Whenever they'd have shipwrecks, the very first things like that were things like this, where people were diving down. Diving bells and things like that. How old does that all go? Well, the first diving bell seems like they took somebody's bell, literally a bell, and the person climbed up in it, they put it in the water, and it held the bubble inside of it, and they set it down onto a ship where the guy was supposed to evaluate everything and then come out, and I don't know if he's going to yank on the string or just swim all the way back up. It doesn't go into graphic detail, but there's that idea there. And there are other tales where the people were just apparently going up under and checking out the bottoms of ships rather than pulling the whole thing out of the water. As I've shown before, shipping goes well back before what people think and what they try to show you in these beliefs. I mean, because of the Bible, they try to get you to believe the very first boat ever built pretty much was done by Noah and so on, whenever he didn't even know how to build a boat or what a boat was, apparently. But how about those ancient Minoans? They have these dolphins on there, and no, that's not a duck beak that they've got on the front of them there. That's actually an attachment that's done to them, and other pictures show that it's a harness. And this idea that they're riding dolphins. And I'm guessing if you're riding dolphins, it might be a good idea to have an airbag. Wouldn't that make sense? There's a lot of pictures that show this type of thing, and there's connections to the dolphins, dolphin riders. There's stories about how they connect to people and all this other thing. But here we have a Syrian bas relief that shows you this concept right in here, and there's a depiction of Neptune. And that doesn't have the bag for bagpipes. It just seems like it's missing right there. But there are other depictions of bagpipes that go all the way through this. You ever wonder where the expression of a woman in her breasts, especially if they're large, referred to as windbags, came from? A lot of these Piper ideas that are shown on here will show two different pipes rather than the bagpipes that we see today with the long flute. They'll have two of them on there and they're tuned different, and so you're playing a more baritone line along with a more tenor line on each one of them. They even used to play just two pipes out their mouth at a time. The one on the right's fashioned to look like a fish. It's an ancient wood carving for thousands of years ago. And ideas and all this pagan things and all this stuff to it. So that's one reason that all got thrown out of there, because people dancing and frolicking and so on like that. The guy on the left right here looks kind of like Santa Claus, is actually Chaucer's miller from the story of Chaucer. Yeah. And so bagpipes have been around for a long, long time, but they're not just an Irish type of thing. They've got a distinctive sound to them, and I feel like I'll probably get copyrighted if I let any part of this play for more than 4 or 5 seconds, because it's one of the two songs that you easily know are quite often played on bagpipes. But what else can we get out of this idea? Because, you know, bagpipes doesn't make a whole connection off of it. Well, believe it or not, when DNA steps up to the plate, that really pretty much is just you're out. They'll tell you that it's an unbelievable sound and it tears at their hearts, just like this guy here telling you about it, that hearing that sound is something special. It's distinct. It's Irish. It's this. It's that. Adopted. But you can go to a lot of foreign countries here, even showing these black people here that are beating on a drum, but then that dude's got a bagpipe set and they're all going with this. So the countries that it affected is much farther afield than you would think. Here's a modern Celtic impersonation or interpretation, and again you see this belly dancing concept that's going with this music that goes with it. And here's the secret of it. If you want to figure out what scale they're doing there, well, that's a Phrygian scale like. Well, what does that sound like? Well, it's the one that we commonly, if I was to play it for right now on the guitar, it's it sounds very much Egyptian or Near Eastern. But then again, if we look at the Phrygians who used to have that cap that we're talking about so much, a Phrygian cap, right? That makes other connections. Let's try to make another one here before it times out. And again, if it goes to a part 2, it's going to be in your top left-hand corner. Well, Ireland has a rich history and all kinds of mythology and strange mythologies that go with ideas, all from the idea that Saint Christopher came and I'm sorry, got that mixed up there. Chased all the snakes out of Ireland and stuff. Well, you come to find out that's not talking about snakes. It's talking about serpent worship and all the things that were there before, because there never has been snakes there. No archaeology's ever shown it. It wasn't like there were a bunch of them and he chased them out or did a Pied Piper type thing. Huge band of red ochre there on the left. So the Druids are known to come from this area, and people wonder if they're Celtic, if they're this or they're Irish or whatever. Well, yes, but Celtic isn't a people. Celtic is a social construct idea. It's weird to use the idea of social construct nowadays to try to talk. In fact, it came out of me before I could stop it. But Celtic is more just like a people. It's not going to denote exactly who it is or whatever. Now, if we associate a certain linguistics with it and we call it Celtic, that's another thing. A lot of people listening right now, when they think of Celtic, they think of a leprechaun that's dressed in green, wants to fight you. He's the Fighting Irish of Notre Dame, which means Northern Dome. Some of these fairy tale places are associated here in all of these lands. There's all kinds of concepts of mythologies that come out of these people. And before they were these people, there are other mythologies too that start to make sense. And they supposedly followed a rainbow to its pot of gold and ended up showing up about 1,000 years, or other people are saying 1,300 years before what we call Celts really were in the area of the islands there. Oh, they were encroaching upon it, but you don't see their presence that are really there. But when they come together, they become a blend in common things between each one of them. So there's your social connectives that are there. And many of these bays like this that are showing going off right at the edge of the water with the seawall that are there, the ocean used to go out for miles before this point. And up under the water there are what would have been coastal civilizations, and it's just hidden up under the water, maybe 30, 40 foot deep, because it's still up. But we could go to the water being 400 foot deep and still find something that used to be ancient and coastal. And there's the area of Doggerland. So you look at these Druidic type people, And Druid's another name by another people. It's almost like the Greeks where they named a bunch of people and we go by that name, but that's not even the name that people used. Druid seems to mean finding or being with the oak trees because they had a strong connection to certain trees and so on. In fact, some of their Ogham script has directly to do with certain types of trees and so on. And they're sacred, like yew trees are connected to elves, and it said wherever an elf died in ancient times, a yew tree grew up. And the proof of that is the yew tree was ended up used for making their recurved fancy bows that were better than everybody else. Well, lo and behold, the Egyptians used yew wood and sycamore too, and that's something you don't think of as being connected to them. Well, that's exactly what they used, and there are connections through this wood used, sacred woods, other ones for certain purposes. Crazy situations or connectives here, but these ancient Druids have these connections and these ceremonies that are all astrotheological. Stonehenge itself is all hooked up to astrotheology, the stars. In fact, whenever we get the first depiction or description of these people, again, there's some type of respect given. They said they know a lot about the world. They know all about the stars, the planets, the size of the earth, and the cosmos.